Adultery is a sin that never goes out of fashion. I think that one of the main causes of increasing number of family breakups in the UK and the heartache that results from that is caused by adultery more than any other single issue. And yet there are many people in our society that argue that committing adultery is a natural thing to do and that is something that should be encouraged, perhaps to spice up your marriage. The philosopher Alain de Botton says that the desire not to commit adultery might be considered irrational or against nature. Monogamy and the desire to remain faithful to one partner can be seen as unnatural or even lacking in imagination. And there are websites that you can visit where people who are married can arrange to meet other married people in order to commit adultery. The reality, of course, is that it's creating havoc in our society and among the children of these marriages. And Proverbs repeatedly warns us about the dangers of adultery. A lot of the book, as we've seen, is written as a father's instructions to a son, but the advice is just as relevant to daughters. And although the driving force for adultery may be different for a woman, there's absolutely no gender monopoly on adultery. So in Proverbs, adultery figures highly on the list of dangers that should be avoided by a wise son. For example, Proverbs 23, "My son, give me your heart, and let your eyes keep to my ways, for a prostitute is a deep pit, and a wayward wife is a narrow well." Proverbs 6 says that a man who commits adultery lacks judgment. Whoever does so destroys himself. In various places in Proverbs we get the picture of the adulteress with her seductive words, her lips dripping honey, Proverbs 5, her beauty in Proverbs 6 that leads away impressionable young men. And the fact is, it's depressingly relevant to our society, which is really over-sexualized. And Proverbs is clear that the wise person will avoid it. Wisdom, Proverbs 2 says, will save you from the adulteress, from the wayward wife with her seductive words. On the other hand, those who fall into the adulteress's trap are described as lacking in judgment, simple, like an ox going to the slaughter in chapter 7, and also, even more seriously, in chapter 22, as being under the Lord's wrath. In fact, there's nothing positive about adultery. The betrayal associated with adultery can destroy the lives of those who are directly involved. You also have extensive collateral damage to children, to parents, and friends, and it contributes to the kind of unstable society that we're finding today. The writers of Proverbs were very clear about the consequences of adultery. In the end, she, that is the adulteress, is as bitter as gall, sharp as a double-edged sword. Her feet go down to death. Her steps lead straight to the grave. Proverbs chapter 5. In Proverbs chapter 2, her house, the adulteress's house, leads to death, and her paths to the spirits of the dead. None who go to her return or attain the paths of life. Now that's fairly serious warnings, and although all of it is expressed in terms of the adulteress, it's just as appropriate for the adulterer. So how should we avoid adultery? Church history, I think, is littered with the carnage that's caused by adultery committed by prominent Christians, and none of us is immune from that temptation. So how can we guard against it? Proverbs suggest, I think, that there are three ways in which we do this. First of all, perhaps the most important, don't expose yourself to temptation. Recognizing potentially dangerous situations and keeping away from them, I think, is the first step. In Proverbs chapter 5, the father warns the son to avoid temptation. Keep to a path far from her. Do not go near the door of her house. In Proverbs chapter 7, there is a very detailed description of the seduction process of a foolish young man who is enticed into the house of the adulteress. He's described as this. He's described as going down the street near her corner, walking in the direction of her house at twilight as the day was fading. If he had not been there, he would not have found himself in the situation. Did he know where he was going? Well, possibly so. But as the chapter goes on to say, like a deer stepping into a noose, he gets trapped. So avoiding exposure is the first step. Second step is not to deceive ourselves. I find it astonishing the extent to which we can kid ourselves when we are approached with a temptation that it's not going to have any negative consequences. We can really delude ourselves in this. And Proverbs makes this point. Can a man scoop fire into his lap without his clothes being burned? Can a man walk on hot coals without his feet being scorched? So is he who sleeps with another man's wife. No one who touches her will go unpunished. Proverbs chapter 6. It's inevitable, as sure as night follows day, that there will be a price to pay. So let's not deceive ourselves. So we avoid temptation. We don't deceive ourselves. Thirdly, and I think importantly, accentuate the positive. It's not all negative stuff to be avoided. Proverbs doesn't say that we should live like monks in complete celibacy. There's a positive alternative to the destructive lifestyle of the adulterer. Listen to this. Drink waters from your own cistern, running waters from your own well. Let them be yours alone, never to be shared with strangers. May your fountain be blessed, and may you be satisfied with the wife of your youth. May you ever be captivated by her love. Why be captivated, my son, by an adulteress? Why embrace the bosom of another man's wife? Temptations to sexual immorality are all about us. And Proverbs, in common with other parts of Scriptures, tells us that we have to have the discernment to avoid these temptations. And Solomon, of course, who's the writer of most of the book of Proverbs, speaks from his own bitter experience on this, because for all his wisdom, Solomon was enticed away from the Lord by foreign women that he got involved with. And the same thing can happen to us if we're not careful.